There is a moment in every military campaign when the machinery of war stops functioning the way it was designed to. Not with a single catastrophic defeat, not with a dramatic retreat, but with 1,000 small fractures that spread through the system until the entire structure begins to buckle under its own weight. For Russia's military in Ukraine, that moment may have already arrived, and the evidence is showing up in places that matter far more than any single battlefield. What we are seeing is not just tactical setbacks. It is a cascade of systemic failures that suggest something fundamental has shifted in Russia's ability to sustain its offensive operations. And the most revealing part is not what Russia is losing, but what it can no longer replace. Oh, that is what makes the current situation so different from anything we have seen in the past 2 years. We will show you the evidence in a moment, but first, you need to understand what a military collapse actually looks like, because it rarely matches what most people imagine. When analysts talk about a military being on the brink of operational failure, they are not describing Hollywood-style retreats or mass surrenders. They are describing something far more subtle and far more dangerous. A military begins to fail when it can no longer maintain 3 critical functions simultaneously. Force generation, which is the ability to train, equip, and rotate fresh personnel into combat zones. Sustainment, which is the capacity to keep existing units supplied, maintained, and operationally effective. And command coherence, which is the ability of leadership to coordinate operations, respond to battlefield changes, and maintain morale across dispersed units. When one of these systems degrades, a military can compensate. When 2 begin to fail, the strain becomes severe. When all 3 start breaking down at the same time, you are looking at the early stages of operational collapse. And right now, across multiple fronts in Ukraine, all 3 systems appear to be showing serious cracks. The evidence is coming from multiple independent sources, including the Institute for the Study of War, the Center for European Policy Analysis, Ukrainian military statements, and verified reporting from media outlets with access to frontline conditions. None of these sources are claiming total Russian defeat, but they are documenting something that may be more significant in the long term. A military that is running out of the institutional capacity to sustain the war it is trying to fight. Let's start with force generation, because this is where the most dramatic shift has occurred. For the first year and a half of the war, Russia was able to draw on a deep reserve of personnel with at least some level of prior military training. Contract soldiers, reservists, and mobilized conscripts who had gone through basic training programs. The quality varied widely, but the baseline existed. That reserve is now effectively exhausted. What Russia is sending to the front lines today represents a fundamental departure from earlier patterns. According to reporting from Mediazona, which has been tracking confirmed Russian military deaths through obituaries and official notices, the most common age of death among Russian soldiers has shifted upward dramatically. In early reports, the median age clustered around 30 to 35. By late December, the most frequent age range had moved to between 46 and 52 years old. This is not a gradual demographic shift. This is an indicator that Russia is reaching deeper into pools of personnel that were never intended for frontline combat roles. Middle-aged men with limited recent training, older reservists who have not served in decades, and increasingly, according to assessments from Ukrainian intelligence and independent reporting, foreign recruits from economically struggling regions who are being offered contracts that promise high pay, but often deliver inadequate preparation. The implications of this shift go far beyond simple manpower numbers. Older soldiers, particularly those without recent combat experience, are statistically less capable of enduring the physical demands of sustained offensive operations. They are more vulnerable to cold weather injuries, slower to recover from minor wounds, and less able to carry the heavy loads required for operations without vehicular support. When you combine this with the current weather conditions in eastern Ukraine, where temperatures have been dropping to minus 14 degrees Celsius, or around 6.8 degrees Fahrenheit, you create a situation where age becomes a direct liability. And this is not speculation. Ukrainian forces have reported encountering Russian assault units that are visibly struggling with basic movement across frozen terrain. Not because they lack courage or motivation, but because the human body at 50 years old simply cannot perform the same tasks as a body at 25, especially under extreme environmental stress. This is force generation failure in real time. Russia is no longer fielding the soldiers it needs for the type of war it is trying to fight. But here is where the situation gets more complex, because force generation problems alone do not explain what we are seeing on the ground. The second major fracture is in sustainment, and this is where logistics, equipment, and basic supply chains come into play. Russia has always relied on a logistics model that prioritizes bulk delivery over precision distribution. Massive supply convoys moving large quantities of ammunition, fuel, and equipment to forward staging areas, where smaller units then distribute resources as needed. This system works reasonably well when you control the roads, when you have air superiority to protect convoys, and when the distances involved are manageable. But in Ukraine, none of those conditions fully apply. Ukrainian long-range strike capabilities, including Western-supplied systems and domestic drone production, have created a persistent threat to Russian logistics networks. Supply depots, ammunition storage sites, and fuel reserves have been targeted with increasing frequency and accuracy. The result is not a total cutoff of supplies, but a significant degradation in the reliability and volume of what reaches frontline units. The evidence for this is visible in multiple ways. First, there is the equipment issue. Reporting from Ukrainian forces and independent analysts has documented Russian units operating with equipment that is either outdated, poorly maintained, or simply absent. Soldiers without helmets, troops without body armor, vehicles that break down and cannot be repaired because spare parts are not reaching maintenance units. In November, the Telegraph reported that Ukrainian forces observed Russian assault groups on the Lyman front, where only 4 out of 20 groups were wearing helmets. This is not a tactical choice, this is a supply failure. Helmets are basic protective equipment, and the fact that they are missing from frontline units suggests that the logistics system is failing to deliver even the most fundamental items. Second, there is the winter equipment problem. Russian soldiers are being sent into sub-zero conditions with gear that is grossly inadequate for the environment. Reports from early January described Russian forces receiving thin camouflage tents that appear to be designed for concealment rather than warmth. These are not insulated shelters. They are flimsy green coverings that do little to protect against wind or cold. One captured video showed a Russian soldier struggling to assemble one of these tents, describing it as taking a very long time to set up and being nearly impossible to use in strong wind. The soldier's frustration was evident, but more importantly, like the existence of these tents as a substitute for proper winter gear is a clear indicator that Russia's logistics system is failing to prioritize survivability over other concerns. And this brings us to the third critical fracture, which is command coherence. A military's ability to function depends not just on having soldiers and supplies, but on having a command structure that can plan, adapt, and maintain morale across dispersed units. This is where the human element of military operations becomes most visible, and it is where some of the most troubling indicators are emerging. On January 6th, United 24, media reported that Russian officers on the Pokrovsk front lines have been submitting formal requests to leave their positions in significant numbers. These are not desertions. These are official requests I submitted through proper channels, asking for reassignment to rear positions, quieter sectors, or medical leave. The fact that officers are making these requests at all is extraordinary. Officers have a vested interest in maintaining their standing within the Russian military hierarchy. Requesting reassignment from a combat zone, especially during active operations, is a career risk. The fact that it is happening anyway suggests that conditions on the ground have become so severe that personal survival is outweighing professional ambition. According to the reporting, these requests are being met with threats of disciplinary action and demotion. But the requests continue. This is not normal military behavior. This is an indicator that morale among leadership has reached a critical breaking point. But we need to be careful here, because morale collapse is often misunderstood. It does not mean that soldiers stop fighting. It means that the reasons they are fighting shift from institutional loyalty and mission belief to simple survival and fear of punishment. And when that shift happens, the quality of decision-making deteriorates. Officers stop taking initiative. They stop adapting to changing battlefield conditions. They start prioritizing the avoidance of blame over the achievement of objectives. And this creates a cascading effect throughout the entire military structure. Lower-ranking soldiers see their officers trying to leave. They lose confidence in leadership. They become less willing to take risks, and the entire tempo of operations begins to slow down, not because of tactical defeats, but because the internal cohesion of the force is eroding. We are seeing evidence of this in the operational data. The Institute for the Study of War has been tracking Russian offensive activity across multiple fronts. In their assessments from late January, a pattern has emerged. Russian forces continue to launch attacks, but those attacks are producing fewer confirmed advances than at any point in the previous 6 months. On January 24th, the assessment noted that Russian forces continued offensive operations in the Pokrovsk direction, but did not make confirmed advances. On January 25th, the same result. Continued operations, no confirmed advances. This is not a single bad day. This is a sustained pattern that suggests Russian offensive capability is degrading in real time. Now here's the part that most analysis skips over. The question is not whether Russia is struggling. The evidence for that is clear. The question is why this is happening now, after 2 years of sustained operations. And the answer lies in the intersection of 3 factors that have all reached critical thresholds at the same time: personnel quality, environmental conditions, and cumulative attrition. Let's take personnel quality first. Early in the war, Russia could draw on soldiers with at least some level of training and physical capability. Even if that training was minimal, it provided a baseline. As those soldiers have been killed, wounded, or rotated out, the replacement pool has shifted to older, less trained, and less physically capable recruits. This is not a deliberate choice by Russian command. This is the inevitable result of sustaining a high-casualty war for an extended period. You eventually run through the best personnel and start drawing on progressively weaker pools. The environmental factor is straightforward but critical. Winter in eastern Ukraine is brutal. Temperatures well below freezing, combined with wind, snow, and frozen ground, create conditions that exponentially increase the difficulty of offensive operations. Soldiers need more calories to maintain body heat. They need proper shelter to avoid cold weather injuries. They need reliable supply lines to ensure they have fuel for heating and vehicles. When those conditions are not met, the human cost rises dramatically. And right now, those conditions are not being met for Russian forces in multiple sectors. The cumulative attrition factor is the least visible but possibly the most important. Every military has what is called institutional knowledge. The accumulated experience of soldiers, officers, and support personnel who have learned how to operate effectively in specific environments. This knowledge is not written in manuals. It exists in the minds of experienced troops who know how to solve problems, adapt to challenges, and keep systems running under stress. When you lose those experienced troops faster than you can replace them, the institutional knowledge erodes. And when that happens, even basic tasks become harder. Maintenance takes longer. Logistics become less efficient. Tactical decision-making becomes slower and less effective. Russia has been losing experienced personnel at a high rate for 2 years. The replacements arriving now do not have that institutional knowledge. They are learning on the job, in the middle of winter, under enemy fire. The result is a military that is operationally less capable than it was 6 months ago, even if the raw numbers of troops remain similar. This is what systemic degradation looks like, and it explains why Russian offensives are stalling even when they have local numerical superiority. But there is a hidden trade-off here that needs to be understood. Russia is not running out of soldiers in an absolute sense. It still has the ability to recruit, conscript, and mobilize additional personnel. What it is running out of is the ability to turn those personnel into effective combat troops within a time frame that matters. Training takes time. Equipment procurement takes time. Building unit cohesion takes time, and right now, Russia is losing experienced troops faster than it can generate competent replacements. This creates a downward spiral. The more experienced troops you lose, the harder it becomes to train new ones effectively, because you need experienced soldiers to train recruits. The weaker your training pipeline becomes, the lower the quality of troops reaching the front. The lower the quality of frontline troops, the higher the casualty rate. And the higher the casualty rate, the faster you burn through your remaining experienced personnel. This is not a problem that can be solved with money or political will. This is a structural problem that takes years to fix under ideal conditions. And Russia is trying to fix it in the middle of an active war. Now, we need to address what this actually costs, because the human dimension of this situation is where the reality becomes most stark. Russian soldiers are dying from causes that have nothing to do with Ukrainian bullets. Frostbite, hypothermia, and untreated minor wounds are killing troops who could have been saved with proper equipment, timely medical evacuation, and adequate shelter. This is not speculation. Ukrainian forces have reported finding Russian casualties who died from exposure rather than combat injuries. And Russian military medical personnel have acknowledged, in reports analyzed by independent outlets, that evacuation and treatment systems are failing to reach soldiers in time. In June of last year, the Center for European Policy Analysis cited comments from a Russian military doctor who noted that soldiers are not being taught basic first aid. On the battlefield, this means they cannot treat themselves or help wounded comrades. Many injured soldiers are left in trenches for extended periods, sometimes weeks, waiting for evacuation that may never come. The combination of inadequate medical training, slow evacuation times, and harsh environmental conditions has created a situation where more than 5% of what medical analysts call potentially salvageable soldiers are dying when they could have been saved with timely care. This is not just a humanitarian tragedy. This is an operational failure. Every soldier who dies from a preventable cause is a soldier who could have been returned to duty after treatment. Every wounded soldier left untreated in a trench is a signal to the rest of the unit that their lives are not valued. And that signal erodes morale faster than any tactical defeat. Ukrainian forces have started referring to some Russian assault units as disposables. This is not meant as a rhetorical flourish. It is a description of how these units are being employed, sent into assaults with minimal support, inadequate equipment, and no realistic plan for evacuation or reinforcement. The expectation seems to be that casualties are acceptable as long as forward movement occurs. But when forward movement stops happening, as it has in recent weeks, the casualties become pointless, and the soldiers know it. This is what drives officers to request reassignment. This is what drives troops to avoid initiative. And this is what ultimately breaks a military's ability to function. Here is the catch, though. None of this means what you might think it means. A military on the verge of operational collapse is not the same as a military that is defeated. Russia still controls significant territory. It still has functional logistics networks in some areas. It still has artillery, armor, and air support capabilities that can inflict damage. What is changing is the trajectory. 6 months ago, Russia was capable of launching sustained, multi-front offensives with reasonable expectation of tactical gains. Today, those same offensives are stalling before achieving their objectives. 6 months from now, if current trends continue, Russia may struggle to maintain even the defensive positions it currently holds. But this is not inevitable. Military trajectories can shift based on external factors. Changes in Western support for Ukraine, political decisions in Moscow, breakthrough technologies or tactics, these seasonal changes that alter battlefield conditions. The point is not that Russia has already lost. The point is that the indicators suggest Russia is losing its capacity to sustain the type of war it has been fighting. And that creates a narrow window where the pressure on Russian decision makers becomes most intense. So, what happens next? There are 3 scenarios worth watching over the next 4 to 6 weeks. The first is stabilization. Russia recognizes the current trajectory and shifts to a defensive posture, using the winter months to reconstitute forces, rebuild logistics networks, and prepare for renewed operations in the spring. If this is happening, we would expect to see a significant reduction in offensive operations, increased fortification activity, and public messaging from Russian leadership that emphasizes long-term strategic goals rather than immediate territorial gains. The second scenario is localized breakthrough attempts. Russia doubles down on current offensives, concentrating available resources on a small number of high-priority targets in an attempt to achieve a symbolic victory that can be used for domestic propaganda. If this is happening, we would expect to see a surge in casualties, increased use of reserve units, and short-term tactical gains followed by rapid exhaustion and renewed stalls. The third scenario is fragmentation. Russian command loses the ability to coordinate large-scale operations, and the frontline devolves into a series of isolated local engagements, driven more by unit-level decisions than strategic planning. If this is happening, we would expect to see contradictory operational patterns across different sectors, increased instances of units refusing orders or requesting withdrawal, and a general decline in offensive tempo without corresponding improvements in defensive effectiveness. None of these scenarios are mutually exclusive. Different sectors of the front could experience different patterns simultaneously. But tracking which pattern dominates will tell us a great deal about the actual state of Russia's military capacity. And here is what we know as of right now. Offensive operations continue, but confirmed advances have dropped significantly. Personnel quality indicators continue to decline. Logistics and sustainment problems are worsening. Command coherence is showing serious strain. And environmental conditions are amplifying all of these problems in ways that cannot be easily mitigated. This does not mean Russia will lose the war tomorrow, but it does mean that the window for Russia to achieve its strategic objectives through conventional military operations is closing. And the longer that window stays closed, the more likely it becomes that the current situation represents not a temporary setback, but a permanent shift in the balance of capabilities. 3 things to take away from this. First, military collapse is not a single event. It is a process that unfolds through the gradual breakdown of multiple interconnected systems. Second, the current indicators suggest Russia is experiencing that breakdown across force generation, sustainment, and command coherence simultaneously. And third, the next 4 to 6 weeks will reveal whether Russia can reverse these trends or whether the current trajectory becomes locked in. What matters more in this situation? The age and quality of personnel being sent to the front? The ability to maintain supply lines through winter conditions? Or the willingness of officers to continue executing orders they believe are unsustainable? Think about which factor you believe will prove most decisive, because the answer will determine how this develops. This video is for educational and news commentary purposes only, based on publicly available information. Details may evolve as new reporting emerges.